Welcome everyone to the Friday edition of our Packers News live chat alongside Tom Silverstein. I am Olivia Reiner. The Packers hit the field one last time this week, getting ready for their rematch against the Detroit Lions on Sunday. We'll take a look at the Packers' final injury report, plus we'll also look ahead to the Lions' offense today. Before we get into that, as always, you know the drill. You can be a part of our conversation. If you're over on Facebook, Periscope, or YouTube, leave us a question down in the chat, whatever is on your mind. Tom and I want to hear it. We'll get to some of your thoughts toward the end of our conversation today. The Packers are in a little bit of a tight end pickle. They only have two healthy tight ends on the active 53-man roster in Robert Tonyan and Mercedes Lewis. Tight end Jay Sternberger has been ruled out for this Sunday's game against the Lions as he's still in concussion protocol dating back to this past weekend against the Philadelphia Eagles. Sternberger plays a very versatile role in head coach Matt LaFleur's offense. He only plays about 25% of the offensive snaps. However, he's capable of lining up not only as a tight end, but also in the backfield at fullback as a lead blocker. How are the Packers going to replace Sternberger this upcoming weekend?
Well, I think both Mercedes Lewis and Tonyan are probably going to have to play a little bit more. I'm sure they'll bring up Dominic Daphne for a second straight week to just give them a third option, possibly a blocking option as a fullback too. And I wouldn't be surprised to see a situation where they have maybe Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones in the backfield, with Williams maybe helping out as a blocker, or if they need that. Alan Lazard can effectively be a tight end by lining up really tight to the to the line of scrimmage. So I don't think it's the end of the world not to have Sternberger. It's nice to have three tight ends and keep a guy like Tonyan fresh because he plays a lot of snaps. I think that's probably where they'll miss it the most.
Let's take a look ahead to this Lions offense that the Packers are going to be seeing for a second time this season. They will be met yet again with 35-year-old running back Adrian Peterson, who is not immune to father time. He's only posted about 500 yards on the ground this season. He hasn't had a single game this season where he's had 100 rushing yards in a single game. He is on pace for one of his least productive seasons of his entire career. How likely is it that he is able to put together a better game this weekend against the Packers' run defense?
Well, I don't think they need to fear him. I think he's a guy who could come in and average, 4, 5, 6 yards per carry. But I don't know that we'll see him rush for 150 yards. I just would be really surprised if that happened. If it did, it'd be really a check mark against Mike Pettine's defense, run defense. I think, more than likely he'll be sprinkled in. They'll do some draw plays. They'll try to get him going on first and second down to try to make down and distances manageable. But this game's going to be in Matthew Stafford's hands. He's going to determine the outcome of this game for them.
Well, the Lions have been pretty quiet on the ground. They have been very busy through the air. Quarterback Matthew Stafford is coming off of a 400-yard passing game against the Chicago Bears. This season, he is 9th in the NFL in both passing yards total and also in passing attempts. So he's putting the ball out there. A lot of explosive plays this weekend came from Matthew Stafford's arm. He was able to connect with wide receiver Quintez Cephas, former Wisconsin Badger, on a 49-yard touchdown pass against the Chicago Bears. How careful do the Packers be that they're not getting chopped up in the passing game this weekend?
Well, they're lucky they don't have to face Kenny Golladay for the second time this year. That's always a benefit. They've struggled with Marvin Jones to some degree, but I think they can be aggressive. I think they can really be out there, and if they want to double someone, go and double them, and not really have to worry about a ton of other guys beating them. Now, one guy they do have to worry about is T.J. Hawkinson, the tight end. He's a guy that maybe they wind up doubling him or figuring out a way to keep him zoned out so that he doesn't hurt them. Because right now he's probably their best receiver, one of their most productive guys. And so that'll be a matchup to watch. And but otherwise, this is the kind of game where it's built for the secondary. There should be some matchups where Kevin King and Jair Alexander feel like they can win, and they should.
Let's head over to Facebook, Periscope, and YouTube for some of your questions. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'll start with Jared over on Facebook, who wants to continue conversation about the injury report. Jared would like an update on wide receivers Equanimeous St. Brown and Malik Taylor. Equanimeous St. Brown is currently on the injury report dealing with the remnants, I suppose, of his concussion. However, he's mostly listed on the injury report right now with a knee injury. He is out of concussion protocol and is just, for the most part, in practice dealing with the knee. And then Malik Taylor, who is a late addition to the injury report this week with a hamstring injury. He popped up yesterday. He did not participate in today's practice at all. How concerned are the Packers about Taylor and St. Brown?
Well, with Taylor, anytime you see a guy go out on a Thursday and then he doesn't practice on Friday, it usually, it means he hurt his hamstring in practice. So, if he didn't practice on Friday, there's two things. One, they're either just giving him the day to 2 days to get healthy, or they just feel like he's not going to play. And I do get the sense that St. Brown is ready. If he's out of the concussion protocol, I think his knee he's been on the injury report for a long time with that knee, and he was really playing pretty well up until the time he suffered that concussion. So, if I were a guessing man, I'd say that St. Brown plays and Taylor doesn't.
Let's take a look at the second part of this question here. Jared wants to know if neither of these wide receivers can go, will the Packers bring up a wide receiver from the practice squad? The Packers have 3 wide receivers sitting on the practice squad right now in Reggie Begelton, Seth Roberts, and Juwan Winfree. If the Packers were to need a wide receiver for any reason this upcoming weekend and they wanted to take one off of the practice squad and elevate them to the active roster, who is most likely to be called up?
Well, it depends what they need him for and who he's replacing. So if it's if they're trying to replace Malik Taylor, then Juwan Winfree is probably the guy. He's got the size like Malik Taylor. He can block, play some special teams. I would think that would be the way they would go. If for some reason Equanimeous St. Brown and Taylor couldn't go, then they'd have to think about maybe bringing up 2, but they also have Tavon Austin, who's coming up, and they might be able to carve a little bigger role for him. And Alan Lazard's kind of coming around. They've got Adams and Valdez-Scantling. They got 3 guys that can run all the time. The problem, this is where the tight end situation kind of gets dicey, and probably where they need to bring up a tight end and probably bring up a receiver, especially if both St. Brown and Taylor can't play.
Thanks so much, Jared, for your question. Let's go to Southwest Florida Packers Fan Club. Thanks for joining us today down in Southwest Florida. They want to know, will safety Darnell Savage Jr. play? Savage Jr. also popped up late on the injury report this week with a groin injury. Again, similar situation to Malik Taylor. Savage was not a non-participant in practice this week. However, he did become a limited participant today. How likely is it that he is still able to go this upcoming Sunday?
Well, I would think he'd be able to play. Now, I can't remember if they gave him a status or not. Did they give him a questionable status?
He is questionable to play this weekend.
Yeah, typically they do that because, maybe he tweaked it and then they're going to practice him on Friday and they want to see where it's at on Saturday, and they don't want to be, slapped by the NFL if all of a sudden he can't play. So I would guess that he'll be okay. That's typically what you see. If a guy can practice on a Friday, then he's usually ready to play.
Thank you, Southwest Florida Packers Fan Club. Let's go over to Lee on Facebook. Lee wants to know, is running back A.J. Dillon going to get meaningful snaps at some point this season? Dillon is finally off of COVID-19 reserve after spending about 5 weeks there. He participated in practice both yesterday and today. It is unclear whether or not he will be active this upcoming weekend to play against the Lions. However, he is certainly eligible to if the Packers see fit. Where does Dillon stand right now in this Packers offense after missing a lot of time?
Yeah, as I'm considering that question, I'm saying to myself, okay, what does meaningful mean? If it means that they will, give him snaps instead of Aaron Jones, or just put him in the rotation, I would say no. I would say that he could get a series. He could, if they get ahead, he could find himself getting some snaps. But I know they do want to expand his role, and LaFleur talked about it. They do want to get into some two back sets. They like that, where they can have two running backs back there, and one of them could split out as a wide receiver. So, LaFleur gave kind of mixed signals about Dillon. At first, I sort of read that he was going to play. It sounded like he was going to play, and then I asked him about it again, and then it kind of sounded like, well, they might need to wait a week. I guess my gut feel is if he can play some special teams, he'll be active.
Thanks so much, Lee, for your question. I gotta say, is that Aaron Rodgers' face on that is fantastic. That is I appreciate that profile image. Let's go over to Dave over on Facebook. Dave wants to know if there are going to be any changes to the Packers special teams this week. The Packers have struggled on special teams over the last several weeks. They have given up 2 punt returns for a touchdown, both against the Indianapolis Colts and the Philadelphia Eagles. How can the Packers special teams units make any significant changes in these last several games?
Yeah, they got to do something. I mean, they have to shore up their punt return unit, punt return coverage. They have to really get more consistent with their gunners, and really just with the lanes that these guys go down on. And then, maybe they need J.K. Scott to punt out of bounds. I mean, just try to drive it long towards the sideline and not try to hide anything. So that I wouldn't be surprised if we see that, or we see Scott just punt really high and just try to hang it up and force fair catches and not worry about distance as much as just forcing fair catches. That would help out the coverage team a lot. I do want to see whether Tavon Austin can give them a shot in the arm in the return game. I mean, I wouldn't expect huge things, but the guy is an accomplished punt returner, and while he hasn't done it in a while, it's a skill. It's usually a skill that isn't developed. You know how to field the ball. You know how to run really quickly after you field the ball. It's usually something that's a little bit innate. And so I would think he wouldn't have too tough a transition doing that.
Tavon Austin has experience fielding punt returns, not as much experience fielding kick returns. And last week, the Packers, what they did when Tyler Ervin came out was they used Malik Taylor as their kick return specialist. If Taylor isn't able to go this week, as he's questionable on the injury report, then they're going to have to go back to the drawing board, and perhaps we'll see Tavon Austin returning some kicks. So something to keep in mind.
A safe option is like Jamal Williams. They could use him. There's several less guys who aren't going to break it. Chandon Sullivan could do it. So we'll see.
Thanks so much, Dave, for your question. Let's go over to YouTube. We've got a question here from Michael. Michael wants to know, will big defensive lineman Anthony Rush play this weekend against the Lions? Rush was picked up by the Packers last week, a 6'4", 361-pound nose tackle, a big player that made one of the biggest players on the team, defensive lineman Tyler Lancaster. He said he felt small next to Anthony Rush. So the Packers are in a little bit of a situation right now after they put defensive lineman Billy Wynn on injured reserve, where he is expected to be for about 3 weeks with a triceps injury, and they could use the depth along the defensive line. How likely is it that Rush is available and ready to go this upcoming weekend against the Lions?
It's iffy. So, it kind of depends. We don't know a lot about Rush, and while he's 360 pounds, he's not exactly a classic run stopper, even though he's got that kind of size. he can move a little bit and he can get up the field. So it kind of depends on how they're going to play defense against the Lions. If they're going to play a ton of nickel, then more than likely they won't need him. It's sort of like how they used Billy Wynn. You know, when they needed him, when they needed more defensive linemen, when they're going to play more base defense, where someone was nicked up a little bit, then they played him. When they were going to play a lot of nickel and dime, then they didn't make him active. So I think Anthony Rush is ready to play, but I think it really comes down to what is Pettine going to be calling this weekend. And chances are they need pass rushers more than anything against Stafford. So, I would guess that come Tennessee, when Derrick Henry comes to town, then he'll be active. You can pretty much bet on that.
Thanks so much, Michael, for your question. Let us take a question from Rod over on Facebook. Rod wants to know, will the Packers re-sign running back Aaron Jones? It's the golden question. It's a popular question, and it's a good question because it hasn't happened yet. Aaron Jones becomes a free agent in 2021, and while the Packers have made it a priority to lock down defensive lineman Kenny Clark and left tackle David Bakhtiari, the Packers have yet to address running back Aaron Jones. Where does Jones fall on the priority list heading into this offseason?
Well, I said this a little earlier in the year, and I'm starting to feel this way even more, that they're not in a hurry, and I think they're contemplating letting him hit free agency and letting the market decide what he's worth, and then they decide whether they want to pay it, rather than paying the high end of the price and deciding, having essentially Jones decided for him rather than the market decide it. I think there's a possibility, let's say Jones doesn't get to 1,000 yards. And, at the end of free agency or the start of free agency, maybe there's teams that are just not that interested and view him as somewhat, not someone to spend a ton of money on. And maybe the Packers are able to get back in it and sign him. I kind of think that's what their strategy is right now, because if they really, really valued him, I think they would have signed him by now.
Thanks so much, Rod, for your question. We appreciate it. Let's continue over on Facebook with Andrew. Andrew, we've been talking about injuries to running back Tyler Ervin, wide receiver Equanimeous St. Brown, tight end Jay Sternberger. Talked about that today, and really this past week with Ervin going on injured reserve. They've all had issues this season staying on the field. Ervin has dealt with 3 injuries this season, and this just happens to be the one that has landed him on injured reserve. How much of a liability is that going to be down when the Packers get into playoffs and they need all the depth they can get?
Well, think about who you're talking about. You're talking about Tyler Ervin, who is 4th wide receiver. Equanimeous St. Brown, 5th wide receiver, Sternberger, 3rd tight end. Would you trade, those guys for Robert Tonyan being injured, or Mercedes Lewis, or Devontae Adams? The Packers are quite lucky. Their very best players are on the field. Most of their big injury issues are over. And so, you're going to have injured guys. There's just going to be guys like this. And these aren't the guys you absolutely have to have on the field to win in the playoffs. You need to have Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams and Allen Lazard and your entire offensive line. Those are the guys you need to have on the field. I wouldn't be too worried about some of the role guys.
Thanks so much, Andrew, for your question. We'll end with a note here from Oh My Zedarius over on Periscope. They say, love the new podcast setup. Olivia and Tom have a good partnership. Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't checked it out already, Tom and I have put up a new podcast this morning, the Green 19 podcast. I am your new host alongside Tom Silverstein. We miss Jim Ozarski very much. However, we're having a lot of fun doing the podcast, and we hope that you enjoy them. What's that, Tom?
Who did you say?
Oh, you don't, no idea. Is Jim just such a far off,
I have
distant
no idea
thought?
what you're talking about. I have blinders. I'm straight ahead.
Jim is doing a great job on the Bucks beat.
Yeah.
Make sure you're still following along with his coverage if you're interested in the Milwaukee Bucks. we miss him despite what Tom says. I know
Yeah, if you
deep
like
down.
that other sport, go for him. Stick with football.
Thanks so much for the kind words. We appreciate it. And thank all of you very much for joining us tonight. We will be back on Sunday to preview the game. Me and Pete Doherty, 90 minutes before kickoff. So make sure you come back to Packers News. Take a look at all of our great coverage over on our website as well. We have lots of news up on the website for you to take a look at. So for Tom Silverstein, I am Olivia Reiner.